The desert wind carried sand across the rocky terrain like ghostly fingers, creating small dust devils that danced between the scattered boulders. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison crouched behind a weathered stone outcropping, his desert camouflage blending perfectly with the harsh landscape. Through his night vision scope, the world appeared in shades of green and white as he studied the compound below. The intel package had been marked Priority Alpha. A high-value target was holed up in the remote facility 30 miles from the Pakistani border, deep in the lawless tribal regions where governments held no sway. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Extract Mohammed Hassan, a former Pakistani intelligence officer who'd been selling advanced weapons systems to terrorist organizations across the region. Hassan had information about planned attacks on American interests, but more importantly, he had the codes to access a shipment of surface-to-air missiles that could down civilian aircraft. The man had to be taken alive. What the intel hadn't mentioned was the small army of fighters surrounding the place. Eagle Eye, this is Alpha Leader. I count at least 40 tangos in and around the target building. Repeat, 40 enemy combatants visible. This is significantly higher than intelligence estimates, Morrison whispered into his radio, his voice barely audible even to his own ears. The response crackled back immediately through his encrypted communications system, the voice of Colonel Matthews clear despite the satellite delay. Copy that, Alpha Leader. Mission parameters unchanged. Extract the package and get out. Intel believes the target is being moved at dawn. This is your window. Morrison suppressed a grunt of frustration. Easy for them to say from their air-conditioned command center back at Bagram Air Base. Out here, 40 armed hostiles meant the difference between a surgical extraction and a bloodbath. He glanced at his team, 6 of the Navy's finest, each man a weapon honed by years of training and countless missions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and a dozen other countries that would never appear on their official service records. Petty Officer First Class Miguel Rodriguez lay prone beside him, his Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle resting on a makeshift bipod constructed from his pack. At 28, Rodriguez was the youngest member of the team, but possessed an almost supernatural ability with a rifle. His longest confirmed kill was 1,047 meters in the mountains of Afghanistan. A Taliban commander who'd been planning an attack on a school. Chief Warrant Officer David Thompson crouched nearby, methodically checking his explosive charges one last time. Thompson was a master of controlled demolition, capable of bringing down a building or opening a locked door with equal precision. His weathered face bore the scars of a career spent in the world's most dangerous places. The others were spread out in defensive positions around their observation point. Petty Officer Second Class Kevin Williams, their communications specialist and medic, Chief Petty Officer Carlos Ramirez, weapons expert and point man, and Petty Officer First Class Marcus Johnson. Their newest team member, but already proving himself invaluable with his engineering background and steady nerves under fire. Listen up, Morrison said through his throat mic. We go in quiet. Rodriguez, you take overwatch from the ridge. Thompson, you're on breach. The rest of you, standard room clearing. We find our guy, and we're gone in 10 minutes. The team moved like shadows across the moonlit landscape. Years of training and countless missions had turned them into a single organism, each man knowing exactly where the others would be at any given moment. They'd operated together so long that words were often unnecessary. The compound consisted of 3 buildings arranged in a triangle around a central courtyard. Intelligence photographs showed typical construction for the region: thick mud brick walls capable of stopping small arms fire, flat roofs suitable for defensive positions, and narrow windows that could serve as firing ports. The main building, a 2-story structure on the northern side of the triangle, housed their target according to intercepted communications. Hassan was supposedly being held on the 2nd floor under guard by local tribal fighters loyal to the Taliban. The entire complex was surrounded by a 10-foot wall topped with razor wire, with a single gate on the eastern side. Guard towers constructed from concrete and steel stood at the northwestern and southeastern corners, each equipped with searchlights and heavy machine guns. It was a fortress designed to withstand assault from local rivals. Not a precision strike by American Special Forces. Rodriguez settled into his sniper position on the ridge overlooking the compound, approximately 800 meters from the target building. Through his advanced thermal imaging scope, he could distinguish between guards and civilians even in the darkness. The heat signatures told a story of disciplined patrols and fixed defensive positions. These weren't amateur fighters. Someone with military experience was organizing the defense. Alpha Leader, this is Overwatch. I count 12 tangos on external patrol, rotating every 30 minutes. No visible heavy weapons beyond the tower-mounted machine guns. Guards appear alert and disciplined. Recommend we wait for the guard change in 15 minutes. Copy, Overwatch. Beginning approach. The team split into two groups. Morrison led 3 men toward the front gate, while Thompson took 2 others around to the rear. The plan was simple. Create a distraction at the front while the main assault team entered from behind. Everything went wrong in the first 30 seconds. As Morrison's team approached the eastern gate, moving in practiced bounds from cover to cover, a guard stepped out of the shadows near the compound's generator shed. The man had been relieving himself behind the building, completely invisible to their reconnaissance. The guard's AK-47 was slung casually across his shoulder as he adjusted his clothing, the cigarette between his lips glowing orange in the pre-dawn darkness. Time seemed to slow as the guard's eyes widened in shock at the sight of the approaching figures in desert camouflage and tactical gear. Morrison could see every detail of the man's face, the unkempt beard, the surprised expression, the mouth opening to shout an alarm that would doom them all. The guard's hand reached for his rifle, but Rodriguez's Barrett spoke first. The massive .50 caliber bullet crossed 800 meters in less than a second, striking the guard center mass and dropping him instantly. The suppressor reduced the rifle's signature, but couldn't eliminate it entirely. The sharp crack echoed off the surrounding hills like thunder. For a moment, Morrison thought they might still salvage the situation. The guard had fallen behind the generator shed, invisible to his comrades. The sound could be explained as a backfiring vehicle or falling rocks. They still had a chance. Then the guard's radio squawked with an incoming transmission, and when no response came, a voice began urgently calling his name. Within seconds, other guards were moving toward the generator shed to investigate. The alarm began wailing across the compound before they'd made it halfway. Suddenly, lights blazed from every building, and the quiet night erupted into chaos. Dozens of armed men poured out of structures that intelligence had marked as empty storage sheds and animal pens. These weren't random fighters stumbling out of sleep. They moved with purpose and coordination, taking defensive positions with practiced efficiency. Someone had been expecting them. "Contact! Contact!" Morrison shouted into his throat microphone as muzzle flashes began sparkling from the compound walls like deadly fireflies. "We're blown! All teams, emergency extraction protocol Delta." But there was nowhere to go. The compound sat in a natural bowl surrounded by rocky hills, with only one narrow access road winding through a pass to the southeast. That road was already rumbling with the sound of approaching vehicles, reinforcements that had been staged nearby, waiting for exactly this moment. Morrison's tactical mind processed the situation with crystalline clarity, even as bullets snapped overhead and ricocheted off the rocks around them. This wasn't a fortunate coincidence or good security procedures. This was a carefully planned ambush, and his team had walked directly into it. "Alpha Leader, this is Overwatch." Rodriguez's voice came through the radio, strained with urgency as he tracked multiple targets through his scope. "You've got vehicles approaching from the south, at least 6 trucks fully loaded with armed personnel. Estimate 40 to 60 additional hostiles inbound. Boss, this is a setup. They were waiting for us." The words hit Morrison like a physical blow. Someone had leaked their mission. Hassan had been bait, and they'd taken it completely. But there was no time for recriminations or wondering who had betrayed them. His team was caught in the open, taking increasingly accurate fire from 3 directions as the defenders oriented on their position. "Thompson, forget the charges. Everyone fall back to position Bravo," Morrison ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos erupting around them. Position Bravo was a defensive position they'd identified during their initial reconnaissance, a cluster of house-sized boulders about 200 meters southwest of the compound that offered decent cover and fields of fire. But reaching it meant crossing open ground under fire from multiple positions, an evolution that would test every aspect of their training. The withdrawal began with textbook precision. Ramirez and Johnson laid down suppressing fire while Morrison, Williams, and Thompson bounded toward the rocks. Their M4 carbines chattered in controlled bursts, forcing the enemy defenders to keep their heads down long enough for the movement team to cover half the distance. Then the return fire intensified dramatically as more fighters joined the battle. Petty Officer Williams took a 7.62mm round through his left shoulder as they ran, the bullet spinning him around and nearly dropping him to his knees. But the young sailor kept moving, his medical training overriding the shock of being hit. Chief Ramirez had to grab Williams' equipment bag as blood began soaking through his uniform shirt. The enemy fire was intense, but poorly aimed. These weren't professional soldiers, just fighters with more enthusiasm than training. They reached the boulder cluster just as the first truck arrived at the compound, its engine roaring as it skidded to a stop inside the gates. 12 fighters poured out of the vehicle's bed, each man carrying an AK-47 and additional ammunition. More trucks were pulling up behind it, the headlights creating a deadly light show in the pre-dawn darkness. Morrison conducted a hasty head count as his team took defensive positions among the rocks. All 6 team members were mobile and responsive, though Williams would need proper medical attention within hours or risk serious complications from blood loss. The shoulder wound had missed the major arteries, but the bullet had fragmented against bone, creating multiple wound channels. "Overwatch, what's your status?" Morrison called to Rodriguez, who was still maintaining his sniper position on the ridge above them. "Still in position, Alpha Leader, but I'm seeing movement on the ridges to my north and east. They're trying to flank my position with at least 2 teams. I count 8 to 10 climbers working their way up through the rocks. If they reach the ridgeline, I'll be compromised." Morrison cursed under his breath. Rodriguez's overwatch position was critical to their survival. From his elevated position, the sniper could engage targets that were concealed from the rest of the team. If they lost that support, they'd be fighting blind against an enemy that knew every rock and ravine in the area. "How's our ammunition situation?" Morrison asked his team leaders, dreading the answer but needing to know their exact tactical situation. The reports weren't encouraging. Each man had started the mission carrying 300 rounds for his primary weapon plus ammunition for his sidearm, enough for a normal extraction mission, not a prolonged firefight against overwhelming odds. Thompson had expended nearly half his ammunition during the withdrawal from the compound. Ramirez had fired 2 full magazines providing covering fire. Williams, despite his wound, reported that he was down to 4 magazines. "At our current rate of expenditure, we'll be down to sidearms within 90 minutes, Thompson reported grimly. "And that's assuming they don't mount another serious assault." The enemy seemed to realize the mathematics as well. Instead of launching another immediate assault that would cost them casualties, they settled into defensive positions around the compound and began maintaining steady harassment fire. Short bursts from multiple positions, just frequent enough to keep the Americans pinned down and prevent them from regrouping or attempting to break contact. Morrison tried to raise their operational command on the long-range radio, but received only static and interference. The mountainous terrain was blocking their satellite communications, and the nearest friendly forces were at Forward Operating Base Chapman, more than 40 miles away, through some of the most hostile territory in Afghanistan. Even if a rescue mission could be organized, it would take hours to reach them. As the sky began to lighten in the east, painting the rocky landscape in shades of gold and red, their situation became increasingly desperate. The growing daylight revealed just how many fighters they were facing. Morrison's initial count of 40 had swollen to at least 120, with more vehicles arriving every 30 minutes. Word of the trapped Americans was spreading through the tribal networks, and every anti-government fighter in the region was converging on their position like moths drawn to flame. "Boss," Chief Thompson said quietly, crawling over to Morrison's position behind a particularly large boulder, "we need to make a decision. We can try to fight our way out now while we still have ammunition and some darkness for concealment. Or we wait and hope for a miracle that isn't coming." Morrison studied the terrain around their defensive position through his binoculars. The enemy had positioned fighting teams on 3 sides of their boulder cluster, with heavy weapons crews setting up PKM machine guns and RPG positions to cover every possible escape route. The 4th side led toward a sheer cliff face that dropped 60 feet to a rocky canyon floor. Not exactly a viable exit strategy. Fighting their way out would mean abandoning Williams, whose wound was steadily weakening him despite the field dressings and morphine Johnson had administered. Leaving a wounded teammate violated every principle of the SEAL Brotherhood, but staying in position was slowly becoming a death sentence for all of them. "We hold," Morrison decided after a long moment of consideration. "Rodriguez, how much ammunition do you have left for the Barrett?" 12 rounds for the long gun, sir. Enough for a few more precise shots, but after that I'm down to my M4 and sidearm." The sun climbed higher, and the temperature began to rise toward what would be another scorching day in the desert. Soon it would be over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and their water supplies were limited to what they carried in their camelback hydration systems. The enemy fighters were being regularly resupplied from the compound, but Morrison's team would have to ration their water carefully to last through the day. The enemy knew this too, and seemed content to wait them out. Around midday, when the sun had turned the rocks into blazing ovens and heat shimmer made accurate shooting nearly impossible, a white flag appeared from the main building of the compound. The improvised banner was actually a torn piece of cloth tied to the barrel of an AK-47, waved back and forth by someone safely concealed behind the building's thick walls. A voice called out in heavily accented but understandable English, the words carrying clearly across the 200 meters of rocky ground between the compound and their defensive position. "American soldiers! You are completely surrounded! Surrender now, and you will be treated fairly according to the laws of war. No harm will come to you if you lay down your weapons." Morrison almost laughed at the bitter irony of it. These men had been trying to kill them for hours, and now they wanted to conduct negotiations according to the Geneva Convention. The tribal fighters might not understand international law, but they certainly understood the propaganda value of captured American Special Forces operators. Videos of their confessions would be worth more than gold to terrorist organizations across the region. But Morrison also knew what surrender meant for captured Special Operations Forces in this part of the world. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones appeared in videos that were distributed across the internet as recruitment tools. There had been too many examples over the years, soldiers who had vanished in remote valleys, only to resurface months later in grainy footage that haunted their families forever. "Tell you what," Morrison shouted back, his voice carrying the confidence that years of successful missions had given him. "You let us walk out of here with our wounded and we won't have to kill the rest of you. You've got 10 seconds to decide." The only answer was a renewed burst of automatic weapons fire from multiple positions, the bullets striking the rocks around them and sending chips of stone flying in all directions. The negotiation phase was apparently over. As the afternoon wore on and the temperature soared past 110 degrees Fahrenheit, their tactical situation became increasingly desperate. They were down to their final magazines for their primary weapons. Williams was showing signs of shock and dehydration despite their medical efforts, and the relentless heat was sapping their strength with every passing hour. The enemy had moved closer during the midday lull, establishing fighting positions just 300 meters away in a semicircle of sandbags and improvised bunkers. Morrison was beginning to seriously consider their final options, the kind of desperate measures that elite soldiers trained for but hoped never to use, when Rodriguez's voice crackled over their tactical radio network with something that sounded almost like confusion. "Alpha Leader, I've got movement on the eastern ridge, approximately 1,200 meters from my position. Single figure with optical equipment, but this is strange, sir. Whoever it is, they're not with the local fighters. The positioning is all wrong and they're using different equipment." Morrison raised his binoculars and studied the distant ridge line, squinting against the heat shimmer that rose from the sun-baked rocks. At first, he saw nothing but the same barren landscape that surrounded them on all sides. Then, almost hidden among the shadows of a deep crevice, he caught a brief glint of reflected sunlight from glass or polished metal. Someone was up there with advanced optical equipment, observing the firefight from a concealed position that offered an excellent view of both the compound and the SEAL team's defensive position. But the location made no tactical sense for the local fighters. It was too far away to provide effective fire support, and the climb would have taken hours through exposed terrain. "Can you get a clear identification?" Morrison asked Rodriguez. "Friend or foe?" "Negative, sir. Too much distance and atmospheric interference. But whoever it is, they're definitely conducting professional surveillance. The positioning and concealment techniques are consistent with military training." As if in direct response to their conversation, a single rifle shot echoed across the valley like a crack of thunder. The sound was different from the AK-47s and PKM machine guns that had been dominating the firefight. Deeper, more powerful, with the distinctive signature of a high-powered precision rifle. One of the enemy fighters, who had been steadily maneuvering closer to their position, using a series of small boulders as stepping stones for his approach, suddenly pitched forward and lay motionless. The man had been approximately 400 meters away, partially concealed behind cover that should have made him nearly invisible to observers at ground level. The other fighters looked around in confusion and growing alarm. The shot had come from a completely different direction than where the American team was positioned, and the angle suggested an elevated firing position that none of them had anticipated. After several minutes of heated discussion in rapid-fire Pashto, they resumed their positions, probably concluding that one of their own fighters had accidentally discharged his weapon. 5 minutes later, another shot rang out across the valley. This time, an enemy machine gunner who had been setting up a PKM on a tripod behind a concrete barrier slumped over his weapon, his body falling across the machine gun's receiver. The precise placement of the shot, striking the gunner without damaging the weapon, suggested a marksman of exceptional skill. Now, the other fighters were genuinely alert, scanning the surrounding ridges with increasing desperation for the source of the deadly accurate fire. Some began shouting orders and pointing toward the eastern hills, but their search was hampered by the same heat shimmer and distance that prevented Morrison's team from identifying their unexpected ally. Morrison felt the first real spark of hope that he'd experienced in hours. Whoever was positioned on that ridge was not only an exceptional marksman, but for reasons unknown, they were actively helping the trapped SEAL team. Each precisely placed shot was removing a threat and disrupting the enemy's tactical coordination. But even as hope flickered to life, Morrison's tactical experience warned him against optimism. One sniper, no matter how skilled, couldn't fundamentally change the mathematics of their situation. They were still outnumbered more than 20-1, still running dangerously low on ammunition, and still trapped in hostile territory with no realistic hope of extraction. The mysterious marksman might buy them time, but time alone wouldn't get them home. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the rocky landscape in brilliant oranges and purples, Morrison knew they were rapidly running out of time. In Afghanistan, darkness fell like a curtain, and when it came, the enemy would have every possible advantage. Night vision equipment was rare among tribal fighters, but they knew every rock, every ravine, every possible approach route through terrain they'd called home for generations. The mysterious sniper had continued his deadly work throughout the afternoon, methodically eliminating key enemy personnel with shots that defied belief. Morrison had counted 11 confirmed kills, each one a precisely placed round that removed machine gunners, RPG operators, and what appeared to be tactical leaders trying to coordinate the assault on the American position. But for every fighter eliminated, 2 more seemed to take his place as reinforcements continued arriving from across the tribal region. The enemy had adapted to the threat as well. Instead of maintaining fixed positions where they could be easily targeted, they'd begun moving in small groups, using smoke grenades and coordinated rushes to mask their movements. The sniper's rate of fire had decreased accordingly. Even a marksman of such exceptional skill couldn't engage targets that refused to remain stationary. Morrison gathered his team for what might be their final tactical briefing. They were professional soldiers who had volunteered for the most dangerous missions their country could offer, and they all understood what capture would mean in this remote corner of Afghanistan. The videos of previous captives had been mandatory viewing during their pre-deployment briefings. Brutal reminders of what happened to American servicemen who fell into the hands of certain organizations. But as Morrison looked at each man's face in the fading light, Rodriguez, with his steady sniper's eyes constantly scanning for threats, Thompson methodically checking his remaining explosive charges, Johnson calmly cleaning his rifle despite their desperate circumstances, Ramirez maintaining watch over Williams, who was fighting shock and blood loss with quiet determination. He realized he wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. These men had trained together, fought together, and bled together across multiple deployments. They'd pulled each other through firefights in Iraq, mountain ambushes in Afghanistan, and classified operations in countries that would never be mentioned in official reports. They were more than teammates. They were brothers in the truest sense of the word. Somewhere up on that eastern ridge was an unknown ally, whose identity remained a complete mystery, but whose actions spoke louder than words. Every precisely placed shot was a message of support, a declaration that the trapped Americans weren't fighting alone in this remote valley. As long as that sniper kept firing, there was still hope. Morrison just had to figure out who their mysterious guardian angel was, whether they had a plan beyond eliminating individual targets, and most importantly, whether they could help 6 exhausted SEALs escape from what was rapidly becoming an impossible situation. The desert wind picked up again as evening approached, carrying with it the rumble of additional vehicles approaching from the south. More enemy reinforcements were arriving for what would probably be the final assault, and time was running out for SEAL Team Alpha. In the growing darkness, Morrison could see muzzle flashes sparkling from new positions as the enemy fighters prepared for their next move. But somewhere in those distant hills, a lone marksman continued to watch and wait, rifle ready, as the fate of 6 American warriors hung in the balance. The first chapter of their desperate fight for survival was ending, but the most dangerous hours still lay ahead in the Afghan night. Darkness fell across the Afghan mountains like a heavy blanket, transforming the rocky landscape into a maze of shadows and thermal signatures. Morrison pressed himself against the rough surface of the boulder that had served as his command post throughout the long day. Feeling the residual heat radiating from stone that had absorbed the brutal desert sun for 12 hours. Through his ANPVS-14 night vision monocular, the world became an alien landscape rendered in stark green and white contrasts. He could see enemy fighters moving through the compound below like ghosts, their body heat creating clear silhouettes against the cooler background of mud brick buildings and parked vehicles. They were repositioning with the methodical patience of experienced fighters preparing for a final assault. The temperature had dropped 30 degrees since sunset, bringing welcome relief from the scorching heat, but also creating new challenges. The thermal differential between human bodies and the surrounding environment would make his team easier to detect, while the enemy fighters enjoyed the advantage of knowing every rock, crevice, and approach route through terrain they'd called home for generations. "Sound off," Morrison whispered into his throat microphone, conducting the hourly personnel check that had become routine during their long ordeal. Despite everything they'd endured, the failed infiltration, hours of sustained combat, mounting casualties, and dwindling supplies, his team responded with the crisp professionalism that had kept them alive through 5 combat deployments. "Overwatch in position," came Rodriguez's voice from somewhere in the Rocky Hills north of their position. The sniper had been forced to relocate 3 times during the afternoon as enemy counter-sniper teams attempted to triangulate his firing position using sound and muzzle flash detection techniques. His current hide site was approximately 600 meters northwest of the compound, carefully chosen to provide overlapping fields of fire while remaining concealed from ground observation. "Thompson ready and able," the demolitions expert reported from his position behind a house-sized boulder that provided excellent protection from small arms fire. He'd been meticulously conserving his remaining C4 plastic explosive and thermite charges throughout the day, saving them for either a final breakout attempt or a last-ditch effort to deny the enemy any intelligence value from their capture. "Ramirez holding the line," came the next response. The team's senior weapons specialist had taken over the primary defensive sector facing the compound, where his experience with crew-served weapons and advanced optics provided maximum effectiveness against multiple targets. "Johnson operational and monitoring," their communications specialist and engineer reported. Despite being the newest member of Team Alpha, Johnson had proven his worth repeatedly throughout the day by maintaining their radio equipment, managing ammunition distribution, and providing technical solutions to tactical problems as they arose. "Williams, still in the fight," came the weakest response, though the determination in their medic's voice was unmistakable. Petty Officer Williams was fighting a steadily losing battle against blood loss and dehydration, compounded by the stress of their tactical situation. He'd refused additional morphine that would dull the pain, but also cloud his judgment if they needed to move quickly. Morrison checked the luminous dial of his Suunto tactical watch, 2147 hours local time. They'd been pinned down in this boulder field for almost 15 hours, far longer than any infiltration mission was designed to last. By now, their operational command at Bagram Air Base would have declared them missing and initiated emergency search and rescue protocols. But SAR operations in hostile territory required extensive planning, coordination with conventional forces, and approval from multiple levels of command. Help, if it was coming, wouldn't arrive before dawn at the earliest. The enemy commanders seemed to understand this timeline as well. Instead of maintaining the sporadic harassment fire that had characterized the afternoon fighting, they'd gone completely silent. In Morrison's extensive combat experience, silence before an assault was far more ominous than gunfire. It meant the enemy was confident enough in their tactical plan to risk coordinated movement in darkness without revealing their positions prematurely. The compound below had transformed from a scene of chaotic activity into an apparently deserted facility. But Morrison's thermal imaging revealed the truth. Dozens of heat signatures moving purposefully through the buildings and courtyard areas, staging equipment and personnel for what would almost certainly be their final coordinated assault. "Overwatch, what's your tactical picture down there?" Morrison asked Rodriguez, whose elevated position provided the best overview of enemy activities. Multiple heat signatures moving through the compound in organized groups. Looks like they're staging for a coordinated multi-axis assault. I count at least 40 fighters moving into attack positions along 3 separate approach routes. They're being tactically sound about it, staying close to the buildings and vehicles where thermal masking limits my engagement opportunities. Morrison had expected as much. After losing more than a dozen key personnel to the mysterious sniper during daylight hours, the enemy commanders would have adapted their tactics accordingly. Night operations would severely limit the effectiveness of long-range precision fire while maximizing their overwhelming numerical advantage and intimate knowledge of local terrain. What worried Morrison most was the complete communication silence from their unknown ally on the eastern ridge. The sniper who had systematically eliminated enemy machine gunners, RPG operators, and apparent tactical leaders throughout the afternoon had gone completely quiet since darkness fell. Morrison didn't know if that meant the marksman had withdrawn to avoid detection, been compromised by enemy counter-sniper operations, or was simply waiting for more favorable engagement opportunities. Without that crucial long-range fire support, his team would be facing overwhelming odds with critically low ammunition reserves and no realistic hope of outside assistance before dawn. "Contact rear!" Ramirez's urgent whisper cut through the tactical radio network. 2 figures approaching from the southeast, moving through the rock formations approximately 100 meters from our position. Advanced infantry movement techniques, definitely not local militia. Morrison immediately shifted his attention to their 6 o'clock position, scanning through his night vision optics for the thermal signatures that Ramirez had detected. There, 2 human forms moving with practiced stealth from boulder to boulder, their disciplined advance clearly visible against the cooler background of desert stone. They were advancing with the patience and technical proficiency of special operations forces, taking several minutes to cover each carefully planned bound. "I have visual confirmation," Morrison whispered back. "Thompson, can you discourage their approach with indirect methods?" "Negative on explosives," Thompson replied immediately. "If I use my remaining charges for harassment, we won't have anything left for emergency egress or denial operations." Morrison understood the tactical calculus perfectly. Thompson's remaining C4 and thermite charges represented their only hope for creating sufficient chaos to escape if their defensive position became completely untenable. Using those precious resources prematurely would eliminate their last option for offensive action when survival depended on it. "Understood." "Hold your fire until they reach the 50-meter line," Morrison ordered. "When we engage, make every shot count. We can't afford to waste ammunition on harassment fire." But even as he issued the tactical directive, Morrison could see additional heat signatures moving through the rock formations on both their eastern and western flanks. The enemy was conducting a careful, methodical advance from multiple directions simultaneously. They'd clearly learned hard lessons from their earlier frontal assaults and were now applying sophisticated small-unit tactics designed to overwhelm the Americans through coordinated pressure from all directions. This wasn't the random collection of tribal fighters that their initial intelligence assessment had suggested. Someone with serious military training and experience was planning and coordinating these operations with a level of tactical sophistication that Morrison found deeply concerning. Williams struggled to shift into a more effective firing position despite his shoulder wound, checking his M9 sidearm with hands that trembled slightly from progressive blood loss. "Boss, what's our total ammunition status?" Morrison conducted the mental calculation with the grim precision of a man whose life depended on accurate numbers. 18 magazines remaining for primary weapons across all personnel, plus full sidearm loads. Approximately 300 rounds total if we maintain strict fire discipline. It was a sobering assessment that hung in the air like a death sentence. 300 rounds divided among 6 elite operators. Facing an organized enemy force of more than 100 experienced fighters who knew the terrain intimately and possessed unlimited ammunition resupply from the compound below. Even with their superior training, advanced equipment, and years of combat experience, the stark mathematics of their situation were becoming impossible to ignore or overcome through tactical superiority alone. "Movement to our front," Johnson reported from his position behind a carefully constructed parapet of loose stones. "Large formation advancing from the compound direction. They're using some type of military smoke for visual concealment." Morrison could see the tactical development clearly now through his thermal optics, wisps of white phosphorus smoke drifting across the open ground between the compound and their defensive position. The enemy was employing military-grade smoke grenades, which suggested either the presence of foreign advisors or access to captured equipment from Afghan government forces. The coordinated assault began with a devastating mortar barrage that caught Morrison completely off guard. Throughout the long day of fighting, he'd observed no evidence of indirect fire capabilities among the enemy forces. But now, 82mm mortar rounds began falling around their position with the kind of accuracy that indicated professional forward observers adjusting fire in real time. The first round detonated 15 meters to their left, showering the team with razor-sharp rock fragments and pulverized concrete from impact with the boulder field. The explosion was followed immediately by 2 more rounds bracketing their position. Classic fire adjustment techniques taught in military artillery schools around the world. "Incoming indirect fire! Take cover!" Morrison shouted, but their boulder cluster provided limited protection against plunging fire from above. The mortar rounds walked steadily closer to their position with each successive salvo, demonstrating the presence of trained forward observers who could communicate with the mortar crew and adjust targeting based on observed impacts. Morrison realized with growing alarm that the enemy had been far more organized and militarily capable than their initial tactical assessment had suggested. This wasn't a spontaneous tribal uprising or opportunistic ambush. Someone with serious conventional military experience was coordinating a sophisticated combined arms assault using indirect fire support to mask the advance of ground assault forces, exactly the kind of tactics employed by professional military units worldwide. "Alpha Leader, this is Overwatch." Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos of exploding mortar rounds with urgent intensity. "I have positive identification on enemy forward observers. 2 personnel with military radio equipment positioned on the compound's north wall, approximately 400 meters from your location. They're directing the indirect fire. Request immediate permission to engage." "Engage immediately. Priority target," Morrison responded without hesitation. Rodriguez's Barrett M82A1 spoke twice in rapid succession. The distinctive sound of 50 caliber rounds barely audible over the continuing mortar explosions. Morrison couldn't observe the results through his night vision equipment, but the mortar fire ceased abruptly after Rodriguez's second shot, a clear indication that the forward observers had been successfully eliminated. 2 tangos confirmed down, Rodriguez reported with the professional satisfaction of a master craftsman. "Forward observers neutralized. That should terminate their indirect fire support capability." But the tactical respite was temporary at best. Even as the mortar rounds stopped falling around their position, Morrison could see dozens of human heat signatures advancing through the artificial smoke from 3 separate directions simultaneously. The enemy had expertly used their indirect fire support to mask the beginning of a coordinated ground assault, and now approximately 60 fighters were closing on their position with the kind of tactical coordination that spoke of professional military training. "Here they come," Thompson said grimly, settling his M4 carbine against the rock parapet he'd constructed from loose stones throughout the day. "This is going to test everything we've learned." Morrison felt the familiar calm that had carried him through dozens of firefights across multiple combat theaters. All the planning and preparation was finished. Now their survival depended entirely on training, instinct, and whatever divine intervention might be available to 6 Americans trapped in hostile territory. "Remember your assigned sectors of fire," he told his team through the tactical radio network. Controlled bursts only, aimed shots with confirmed targets. We need to make every single round count because there won't be any resupply coming. The enemy ground assault reached the edge of their defensive perimeter with the kind of tactical coordination that would have impressed conventional military units. Multiple groups of fighters advanced simultaneously from different directions, their movement masked by smoke grenades and coordinated covering fire from crew-served weapons positioned around the compound. Muzzle flashes erupted from dozens of positions as automatic weapons fire swept across the boulder field where Morrison's team had constructed their hasty defensive position. The volume of fire was overwhelming, hundreds of rounds per minute from AK-47s, PKM machine guns, and RPD light machine guns creating a deadly crossfire that made movement impossible. The Americans returned fire with the disciplined accuracy that years of intensive training had ingrained so deeply it had become instinctive. Each man engaged targets within his assigned sector of responsibility, applying the fundamentals of marksmanship even under the extreme psychological pressure of being outnumbered more than 10-1. Morrison's M4 carbine spoke in short, precise, three-round bursts as he engaged enemy fighters attempting to flank their position from the northern approach. His ACOG thermal imaging sight allowed him to track targets even through the artificial smoke and natural darkness. But the sheer number of attackers was becoming overwhelming. 30 meters to his left, Thompson's rifle fired steadily as he engaged a squad of fighters advancing from the eastern approach route. Each shot was carefully aimed and deliberately placed, the demolitions expert applying marksmanship skills that had earned him expert ratings on every qualification range for the past 8 years. Despite their superior accuracy and advanced optics, the enemy kept advancing through their own casualties. For every fighter eliminated by American marksmanship, 2 more seemed to emerge from concealment to continue the assault. The attackers had learned to advance using fire and movement techniques, with some fighters providing covering fire while others bounded forward to new positions. "I'm down to my final magazine for primary weapon," Ramirez reported over the tactical radio, his voice remaining completely calm despite their desperate circumstances. "Same situation here," Johnson added from his position behind a boulder that provided excellent protection from frontal fire, but limited his ability to engage targets on the flanks. 2 magazines remaining for M4, full load for sidearm. Morrison could see enemy fighters less than 25 meters from their position now, close enough that he could hear individual voices shouting tactical instructions in Pashto over the continuous sound of automatic weapons fire. They were being overwhelmed through pure mathematics. No amount of training or technological superiority could overcome such overwhelming numerical disadvantage when ammunition became critically limited. The enemy assault teams had adapted their tactics throughout the day, learning to use terrain masking and coordinated movement to minimize their exposure to American marksmanship. They were no longer the undisciplined militia fighters that intelligence had suggested, but rather a well-organized force capable of conducting sophisticated small-unit operations under fire. Just as Morrison was preparing to give the order for their final defensive stand, the last-ditch effort that would expend their remaining ammunition in a desperate attempt to break up the assault before it overran their position entirely, a new sound joined the chaos of close-quarters battle. The distinctive crack of a high-powered precision rifle echoed across the valley from the eastern ridgeline, followed immediately by a second shot, and then a third in rapid succession. Each shot was perfectly placed and devastatingly effective, striking key targets in the enemy assault formation with surgical precision. Someone with an advanced sniper system was engaging the enemy force from a concealed elevated position, and the tactical effect was immediate and dramatic. Morrison could see enemy fighters dropping throughout their assault formation as accurately placed shots found their targets in complete darkness. But this wasn't the same methodical, patient shooting that had characterized the afternoon. This was rapid, aggressive engagement, a skilled marksman firing as quickly as he could acquire and engage targets while maintaining the accuracy necessary for first-round kills at extended range. "Where the hell is that fire coming from?" Thompson shouted over the continuing gunfire, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and professional curiosity. Morrison scanned the surrounding ridge lines through his night vision optics, searching desperately for muzzle flashes or heat signatures that would reveal the location of their mysterious ally. But whoever was providing the precision fire support was employing advanced concealment techniques and quite possibly a suppressed weapon system that eliminated the telltale signatures that would normally reveal a sniper's position. The enemy assault wavered and then began to falter as fighters throughout the formation started looking around in confusion and mounting panic. They'd been advancing with complete confidence, knowing that the trapped Americans were down to their final ammunition and had no hope of outside support. But now they were taking precision casualties from an unknown sniper who seemed capable of hitting individual targets at extended range through smoke and darkness. Some fighters began withdrawing toward the compound without orders, their tactical discipline breaking down under the psychological pressure of being engaged by an enemy they couldn't locate or return fire against effectively. Others went to ground where they were, seeking whatever cover was available while trying to identify the source of the deadly accurate fire. "This is our opportunity," Morrison realized immediately. "All teams, prepare to move on my command. We're breaking contact while they're distracted and disorganized." But even as he gave the tactical order, Morrison understood that they faced challenges that went far beyond simply escaping their current defensive position. Williams could barely walk without assistance. They were carrying critically limited ammunition, and they still had to cross 40 miles of hostile territory to reach the nearest friendly forces at Forward Operating Base Chapman. The mysterious sniper had given them a chance, a narrow window of tactical opportunity that might allow them to escape immediate destruction. But long-term survival would require much more than just breaking contact from their current position. In the darkness above them, muzzle flashes continued to sparkle from the eastern ridgeline as their unknown ally maintained precise, devastating fire against the enemy assault force. Morrison didn't know who was up there providing support, why they were helping, or whether they had any plan beyond eliminating individual targets. But he was absolutely going to take full advantage of whatever opportunity they'd been given. The second phase of their desperate fight for survival was about to transition into something entirely different, a running battle through hostile territory where every decision could mean the difference between rescue and capture. In the confusion and chaos of the disrupted enemy assault, Morrison began planning their escape route while praying that their mysterious guardian angel on the ridge had more surprises in store for the long night ahead. "Move! Move! Move!" Morrison shouted as his team began their desperate breakout from the boulder field that had served as both sanctuary and prison for the past 16 hours. The enemy assault force was still reeling from the devastating precision fire that had struck them from the eastern ridge like lightning from a clear sky. In the confusion and darkness that followed the mysterious sniper's intervention, Morrison counted at least 12 enemy fighters down from shots that seemed to come from nowhere. But the psychological effect was even more significant than the physical casualties. Fighters who had been advancing with complete confidence were now scrambling for whatever cover they could find, uncertain where the next deadly accurate shot might originate. Rodriguez continued to provide overwatch from his position on the northern ridge, his Barrett M82A1 speaking methodically as he engaged targets of opportunity during the team's tactical withdrawal. Each shot was carefully considered and precisely placed, but Morrison knew their narrow window of opportunity was closing rapidly. As soon as the enemy commanders regained control of their scattered assault force, the Americans would be caught in open terrain with minimal cover and critically limited ammunition. Thompson took point for the withdrawal, his extensive demolitions training making him expert at identifying safe routes through potentially mined terrain. The chief warrant officer moved with the cautious efficiency of someone who had navigated hostile territory on 4 continents, testing each step for signs of buried explosives or prepared ambush positions. Williams, despite his shoulder wound and progressive blood loss that had weakened him throughout the day, managed to maintain pace with essential assistance from Johnson. The team's newest member had improvised an effective support sling using paracord and equipment webbing, allowing the wounded medic to move without compromising the entire team's mobility. They advanced in tactical bounds across the rocky terrain, utilizing every available piece of cover, while the mysterious sniper continued to engage enemy positions with surgical precision. Morrison estimated they had perhaps 10 minutes before the opposition reorganized their scattered forces and began pursuit operations using the vehicles and motorcycles that had been arriving throughout the day. "Alpha Leader, this is Overwatch." Rodriguez's voice came through the tactical radio network as the team reached a dry riverbed that offered temporary concealment from direct observation. "I'm observing significant movement throughout the compound area. They're bringing up vehicles and organizing what appears to be coordinated search parties. My estimate is 15 minutes before they have effective pursuit teams deployed in the field." Morrison acknowledged the tactical intelligence while studying their immediate situation through his night vision optics. The riverbed provided excellent concealment from ground observation, but also channeled their movement in a predictable direction that experienced enemy forces could easily anticipate and interdict. They needed to reach the main highway that ran along the valley floor, but doing so required crossing nearly 3 kilometers of open ground under potential observation from multiple elevated positions. "Sir," Johnson whispered urgently from his position supporting Williams, "we need to address the medical situation immediately. Williams is showing classic signs of hypovolemic shock, and his wound is still bleeding despite the field dressings and direct pressure we've been maintaining." Morrison moved quickly to personally assess their medic's condition, applying the combat lifesaver training that was mandatory for all team leaders. Williams was conscious and responsive to commands, but his skin was noticeably pale and cold to the touch. Textbook symptoms of progressive blood loss and the beginning stages of shock. They needed proper medical facilities with surgical capabilities within hours, not the days it would take to reach friendly forces by foot movement through hostile territory. Just as Morrison was calculating their rapidly diminishing options and the harsh mathematics of their survival prospects, a new voice crackled through their tactical radio system on an encrypted frequency that should have been impossible for anyone outside their operational command structure to access or monitor. "SEAL Team Alpha, this is Guardian Angel. I've been tracking your tactical situation for the past several hours and have assets in position to assist with emergency extraction operations. Are you prepared to accept immediate assistance from friendly forces not part of your original mission parameters?" Morrison stared at the radio handset in complete shock and bewilderment. The voice was unmistakably female, speaking with the calm professionalism and technical precision of someone thoroughly accustomed to conducting life-and-death operations in hostile environments. The encryption protocols and frequency selections suggested either CIA paramilitary operations or another classified special operations unit, but Morrison's pre-mission briefings had specified that no other American agencies were supposed to be operating anywhere in this region. "Guardian Angel, this is Alpha Leader. Identify yourself and provide your authority for conducting operations in this area," Morrison responded according to standard protocols for unexpected contact with unknown friendly forces. "Alpha Leader, Guardian Angel. I am Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen, United States Army Special Operations Command, currently conducting parallel classified operations in your operational area. I have been observing your tactical situation since approximately 1400 hours and am authorized under emergency protocols to provide assistance to American forces in extremis. Do you have personnel requiring immediate medical evacuation?" Morrison felt a surge of hope tempered by professional caution and operational security concerns. Army Special Operations Command could indicate Delta Force, the 75th Ranger Regiment's Special Operations Elements, or any number of other classified units that operated under different chains of command and security protocols. But the timing of this contact was almost impossibly fortunate, so convenient that it triggered his instinctive wariness about operations that seemed too good to be true. Guardian Angel. We have one urgent medical case requiring immediate surgical intervention and are currently being pursued by approximately 100 hostile personnel with vehicle support capabilities. What assets do you have available for extraction operations? Alpha Leader. I have a two-person sniper team equipped with advanced precision fire systems and encrypted communication capabilities. We have been providing overwatch and fire support for your position for the past several hours. I also have air extraction assets currently inbound to your location, but they will require a secure landing zone and perimeter security for approximately 3 minutes during pickup operations. Morrison's tactical mind immediately began processing this crucial information. A two-person sniper team would explain the incredibly accurate long-range precision fire that had saved them from being completely overrun during the evening assault. But extraction by rotary wing aircraft meant helicopters operating at low altitude in hostile territory. Aircraft that would be extremely vulnerable to ground fire from the pursuing forces and any anti-aircraft weapons the enemy might possess. Guardian Angel, what is the estimated timeline for extraction assets to reach our current position? Alpha Leader, aircraft are currently 20 minutes out from your location. I need you to move immediately to coordinates that I am transmitting to your GPS navigation system. The location is suitable terrain for helicopter landing operations, approximately 1 kilometer southeast of your current position. Morrison checked his handheld GPS unit as the coordinate data appeared on the digital display. The designated location was in relatively open ground with minimal natural cover, exactly the kind of terrain that helicopter pilots preferred for landing operations, but that would leave his team completely exposed and vulnerable during the critical approach and touchdown phases. Copy coordinates, Guardian Angel. Be advised that we have multiple vehicle pursuit elements with estimated time of arrival at our current position in approximately 10 minutes. Understood, Alpha Leader. My sniper team will provide overwatch coverage and harassment fire to delay and disrupt pursuit operations. You need to move immediately to reach the designated landing zone before enemy forces can establish blocking positions or bring anti-aircraft weapons to bear. Morrison made the critical decision that would determine whether his team survived the next 30 minutes. All teams, we are moving immediately to extraction coordinates. Thompson, take point and navigate directly to the GPS location using fastest safe route. Johnson, maintain support for Williams and keep him mobile at all costs. Rodriguez, can you provide overwatch coverage during our movement phase? Negative, Alpha Leader, Rodriguez responded immediately from his position on the northern ridge. I am compromised at this location and need to displace immediately. Enemy counter-sniper teams have been attempting to triangulate my position and are closing on my hide site. Morrison felt their tactical situation deteriorating with each passing minute. Without Rodriguez's precision overwatch support, they would be moving essentially blind across dangerous open terrain, while being actively pursued by a superior force equipped with vehicle support and intimate knowledge of local terrain features. Their only remaining hope lay with the mysterious Guardian Angel and her promises of fire support and emergency extraction. The team began moving through the darkness toward the extraction coordinates, utilizing every available piece of natural cover while maintaining maximum sustainable speed. Williams was visibly weakening from continued blood loss, but maintained the iron determination that had earned him a place on one of the Navy's most elite teams. Behind them, Morrison could clearly hear the sound of vehicle engines starting up in the compound. Pickup trucks and motorcycles that would allow the pursuit force to cover ground much faster than dismounted personnel. They had perhaps 5 minutes before the first enemy elements reached their abandoned defensive position and began tracking their movement using standard pursuit techniques. Guardian Angel, this is Alpha Leader. We are moving to the extraction point as directed but are about to be overtaken by vehicular pursuit elements. Can you engage those targets with precision fire? Alpha Leader, Guardian Angel. I have clear observation of multiple vehicles departing the compound area, engaging immediately with precision fire to disable primary transportation assets. Morrison heard the distinctive sharp crack of a high-powered precision rifle from the ridgeline above their position, followed immediately by the sound of a vehicle engine suddenly stopping. 2 additional shots followed in rapid succession, each accompanied by the sounds of pursuit operations diminishing significantly as vehicles were systematically disabled. Alpha Leader, Guardian Angel. 3 vehicles successfully disabled. Remaining pursuit forces are now dismounted and proceeding on foot. That tactical intervention should provide you with sufficient time to reach the extraction point before enemy forces can effectively interdict your movement. As they approached the coordinates that Guardian Angel had transmitted, Morrison could immediately understand why this particular location had been selected for helicopter operations. The designated landing zone was a natural flat area approximately 50 meters in diameter, surrounded by low ridges that would provide excellent security during aircraft approach and departure. But it was also completely open ground that offered no concealment whatsoever if they were discovered before the extraction aircraft arrived on station. The tactical vulnerability was obvious and unavoidable. They would be completely exposed in open terrain, with nowhere to hide if enemy forces reached their position before the helicopters arrived. Morrison felt the familiar weight of command responsibility as he made decisions that would determine whether his team lived or died in the next few minutes. Guardian Angel, we are approaching the designated landing zone. What is the current status of extraction assets? Alpha Leader, rotary wing aircraft are 8 minutes out from your position. Take defensive positions around the landing zone perimeter and prepare for immediate pickup operations. Be advised that dismounted enemy forces are still advancing on foot and will reach your general vicinity in approximately 12 minutes. Morrison deployed his team in a hasty defensive perimeter around the improvised landing zone, utilizing what minimal cover was available while keeping the central area completely clear for helicopter operations. Williams was positioned in the most protected location available, with Johnson continuing to monitor his medical condition and provide whatever support was possible under field conditions. The night sky remained dark and apparently empty, but Morrison could detect the distant sound of rotor blades approaching from the south, the distinctive, unmistakable sound of American helicopters that represented rescue and survival for his exhausted team. After 16 hours of continuous combat operations, the sound was more beautiful than any music he had ever heard. But even as hope strengthened with each passing second, the sounds of enemy forces searching through the darkness grew progressively closer. Voices calling urgently in Pashto, the metallic rattle of military equipment, and the occasional sharp crack of a rifle shot as nervous fighters engaged shadows and movement in the darkness. Guardian Angel, this is Alpha Leader. We can clearly hear enemy search forces approaching our position from multiple directions. How much longer until aircraft arrival? Alpha Leader, Guardian Angel. 4 minutes until aircraft touch down at your location. Hold your current position and do not engage enemy forces unless directly threatened. I am moving to provide close-range security for the pickup operation. Morrison scanned the surrounding ridgelines through his night vision optics, desperately trying to locate the sniper team that had been providing such crucial support throughout their ordeal. Despite hours of radio contact and life-saving precision fire support, he still hadn't been able to visually identify Guardian Angel or determine her exact position. The helicopter sounds grew progressively louder, and Morrison could see navigation lights approaching from the southeast. 2 aircraft flying in tight formation at extremely low altitude to avoid detection by any anti-aircraft weapons the enemy forces might possess. The lead aircraft appeared to be a medical evacuation helicopter, while the second was clearly configured for armed escort and security operations. Just as the lead helicopter began its final approach to the landing zone, bright muzzle flashes erupted from the ridgeline to the north as enemy search forces spotted the incoming aircraft and immediately began engaging with concentrated small arms fire. The helicopters were extremely vulnerable during the landing phase, unable to maneuver effectively while maintaining stable position for passenger loading operations. That was the moment when Morrison finally saw Guardian Angel in action with his own eyes. A figure suddenly appeared on the eastern ridge, silhouetted briefly against the star-filled night sky before immediately dropping into a professional firing position behind natural cover. The distinctive crack of precision rifle fire began instantly, engaging enemy positions that were threatening the vulnerable helicopters with devastating accuracy and incredible speed. What shocked Morrison most profoundly was what he could observe through his night vision scope during brief moments when Guardian Angel was visible. The sniper was definitely female, relatively small in physical stature, but moving with the fluid efficiency and tactical competence of someone completely comfortable conducting combat operations in the most dangerous environments imaginable. Her rifle work was absolutely extraordinary, engaging multiple targets in rapid succession while constantly changing firing positions to avoid enemy counterfire. The precision and speed of her shooting was unlike anything Morrison had witnessed in 15 years of special operations. Each shot was perfectly placed, eliminating enemy fighters who were engaging the helicopters with automatic weapons fire. She seemed to anticipate where threats would appear, already shifting her aim to new targets before they became visible. Both helicopters touched down simultaneously on the flat ground, their crews maintaining full engine power for immediate departure as soon as passengers were safely aboard. Morrison's team moved quickly toward the aircraft, with Johnson carrying Williams directly to the medical helicopter, while the others provided security during the critical loading process. The helicopter crew chief, a seasoned flight medic with multiple combat deployments, immediately took charge of Williams's medical care, starting IV fluids and applying advanced trauma dressings while preparing for immediate departure to the nearest surgical facility. As Morrison prepared to board the second helicopter with the remaining team members, he keyed his radio one final time to contact their mysterious Guardian Angel. "Guardian Angel, this is Alpha Leader. We are loaded and ready for immediate departure. What is your extraction plan and timeline?" Alpha Leader, Guardian Angel. My team has separate extraction assets en route to our location. Get your wounded teammate to proper medical facilities immediately. It has been an honor providing support for SEAL Team Alpha. Guardian Angel out. Morrison desperately wanted to ask dozens of questions that had been building throughout their long ordeal. Who was this extraordinary woman? What unit was she actually assigned to? Why had she been perfectly positioned to provide life-saving support? How had she managed to maintain overwatch for so many hours without being detected or compromised? But the helicopter crew chief was already pulling him aboard as enemy small arms fire began impacting the ground around the landing zone with increasing accuracy. The pilot was maintaining his professional composure, but Morrison could see the tension in his body language as he prepared for immediate departure under fire. As both helicopters lifted off into the night sky, Morrison caught one final glimpse of the eastern ridge through his night vision scope. Guardian Angel was still there, still engaging enemy positions with precision fire to cover their departure, her muzzle flashes creating brief stars of light in the darkness. Then the helicopters gained altitude and speed, and she disappeared forever into the shadows from which she had emerged. 3 hours later, at the Level 1 Trauma Center at Bagram Air Base, Williams was in emergency surgery, while Morrison sat in a sterile waiting room, writing his preliminary after-action report. He included every detail he could remember about Guardian Angel's crucial intervention: the timeline of her support, the precision of her shooting, the professional competence of her radio communications, and most importantly, her role in saving 6 American lives. But when military intelligence officers attempted to follow up on his report and verify the contact with unknown friendly forces, they discovered something that made no sense whatsoever. There was absolutely no record of any United States Army Special Operations units conducting operations in that specific area during the time frame in question. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen, if that was indeed her real name, had vanished as mysteriously and completely as she had first appeared. The official records showed no evidence that she had ever existed, no unit assignments that placed her in Afghanistan during the relevant time period, and no operational orders that would have authorized her presence in that remote region. The only tangible evidence of her existence was the simple fact that 6 Navy SEALs had returned home alive because of her intervention at the exact moment when hope seemed completely lost. Morrison never learned Guardian Angel's true identity, her real unit assignment, or the actual reason she had been perfectly positioned to provide life-saving support when his team needed a miracle most desperately. The classified nature of special operations meant that some questions would never be answered, some heroes would never be publicly recognized, and some guardian angels would remain forever anonymous. But sometimes, late at night when sleep eluded him, Morrison would find himself thinking about a lone figure on a distant ridge. A skilled warrior with a precision rifle, watching over American fighters who had nowhere else to turn, appearing exactly when needed most, then disappearing again into the darkness from which such heroes emerge. And in those quiet moments he would whisper a heartfelt prayer of gratitude for guardian angels who appear when all hope seems lost, who risk everything to save others, then fade back into the shadows without seeking recognition or reward. The invisible protectors who make freedom possible for those they will never meet.